Mike, thanks for joining us once again.
Oh, thanks a lot. No, I really appreciate the opportunity here.
We asked you to come back on and talk to us on this broadcast here because you authored our September issue cover story, A Digital Transformation, where you looked at the dental software landscape today and really gave a great overview of where it's headed, what it's going to bring to dental practices, and how software developments can change this industry. And I guess, can you tell us a little bit about working on this article and what you learned while putting it together?
Oh, sure. No. And by the way, thanks for asking me to do it. I'll tell you, in the 10 years or so I've been working in the area of dental software and IT, I have not seen more action with vendors than the last year or two. I mean, it's just so much is happening going on. And so for this article, basically, I interviewed different companies in all kinds of areas and kind of got their take on not just where things are right now, but where things are going. As you know, as an IT software geek myself, I always like to think ahead a little bit. I'm really excited about what's going to be happening. So in this article, I'll also be talking about kind of where we're going in the next year or two.
hmm So if you could kind of summarize, are there any key takeaways that you picked up while working on this and things that people reading the article really should be taking home with them?
Sure, sure. So really, it's funny because I think it was, what, a 4,000 word article. I could have written a whole journal on it, right? But I had to stop somewhere. So I tried to pick some major areas. And so really in this article, we cover a few really critical areas. One is, as you know, near and dear to my heart, dental EHRs, right, which you and I have been talking about forever. The other is the growing area of teledentistry, which is so exciting. You and I have done an interview on it. I've done some articles, and the idea of how it will be post-COVID, right? Because teledentistry is not just for COVID. So I kind of touch upon a lot of areas that it's going to help groups, practices, and DSOs as we move forward from the pandemic. Then some really cool, exciting things that actually some of them have been brought up from the medical industry. Rules-based workflows,
hmm
intelligent work lists, image management. My gosh, that's changing dramatically. I talked to Carestream, I talked to Apteris, some of the imaging companies. I mean, what's going on, especially with 3D imaging and things like artificial intelligence and machine learning that are along with image management. That's really exciting too. So those are some of the main areas. Again, I only had a few pages to do, but those are some of the main areas I'll touch upon.
hmm One of the things that I found really interesting in this article is this AI-based clinical decision support and the ability of this software to help clinicians when it comes to diagnostics, treatment planning, and really knowing what the best course of treatment is going to be based on the clinical situation. What did you learn about this with these smart task lists and the smart software that's going to help clinicians in the future guide them through their workflows?
Well, it's really interesting when you talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence. So in order to make it's not really a diagnosis, right? And a lot of docs are kind of worried that the computer is going to take over what they do, right? It's not really diagnosing something and what to do as much as giving folks more information and leading them to where things are going. For example, how AI and machine learning is being used in image management is because now we have literally millions of images and millions of records kind of behind the scenes. Now we can mine that data. And so an image company can look at an image, let's say you do a 3D of a patient, they can look at that and really see what's going on and then say, hey, you know what, on this tooth, this indicates you might want to look at this, or on this gum, you might want to look at this. So basically what's really exciting is the underlying data and the algorithms behind it will actually help dentists pinpoint areas to look at. Now, obviously, then the next step is for the dentist itself to do what they need to do, the procedures or further diagnosis themselves, right, as providers. But it's decision support. It helps lead them to where things are going. So that's happening in image management. It's also happening with electronic health records with problems. So that idea of machine learning and mining the data is just starting to explode. And by the way, this is been happening in medical for a while. So we're just kind of catching up here.
Hmm. One of the things you looked at was software platforms for the growing base of group practices and how software really is kind of the hub that keeps these groups working together. What does the future look like right now for group practices when it comes to both their software needs and the capabilities that are going to be there for them?
Right. So that's really exciting. When you think about a group, and it's funny because once you have two locations, it's a group, right? It's different than a single practice. You have two locations to deal with. So whether it's 2 locations or 50 locations, we have to look at what types of things support the ability to bring all those locations together. So the concept of centralization of functionality and data is extremely important. For example, what's called a longitudinal patient record. If you have 20 locations in a metropolitan area and one patient might go from one location to another to see their docs, well, wouldn't it be great to have the information on that patient in one place? Wouldn't it be great also from an appointment, a billing standpoint, to be able to have all that information in one place, not just from a functionality standpoint. In other words, not just to make schedules from one place, not just to do clinical work from one place with one record, not just to do billing from one place, but also the whole gamut of what it means in terms of reporting and analytics, right? When you think about it, if you're a group or a DSO, really how you really manage your practice is really important. And now we have really powerful analytics tools to do that. But unless that information is in one place, it's really hard to be able to do those kinds of analytics. So basically, to answer your question, what I would say the key to where software is going with groups and DSOs is really in the area of centralization.
Mm-hmm. You also looked at, you mentioned earlier, teledentistry, and we've seen absolutely an explosion in teledentistry offerings in the space since the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the industry and now has reopened dental practices, but in a different environment. Now, teledentistry isn't brand new, but obviously it's having its moment. What did you learn about where it is today, what it's doing during the pandemic, but also what teledentistry might look like a couple years from now when we're not dealing with a pandemic?
Right. Well, I'll tell you an interesting side bit, but I wouldn't be writing the articles and working with you on teledentistry if I thought it was just for the pandemic. The excitement here is really how there's a sea change that's going to be happening in our industry because of teledentistry. So let's talk about that a little bit. Everybody thinks about teledentistry as being, oh, I can triage and I can see my patient online. I can look at problems ahead of time. I can do videos. I can diagnose a few things, right? That's where you're at the pandemic, right? But much further, if you take it further, right? Think about collaboration. Think about all the touch points, the different providers a patient might see, the information going back and forth, images. How do we actually really manage a patient's case effectively, right? And one of the ways we do it is what's called the asynchronous workflow. So real quick, just a little geek term, but synchronous workflow in teledentistry, if you hear it, is the video stuff that everybody sees, right? Video, chat, being able to do videos real time, right? The asynchronous part is really where the exciting growth is going to happen, is really to behind the scenes share information with the patient, with their medical provider, with their dental provider, pass information back and forth, and actually, in medicine, it's called a medical home, which is every touch point that a patient touches all the providers. With teledentistry, we're building a dental home, right? Which is the ability for different providers to be able to do cases on patients. So that's really exciting. We're getting to a point in the future when you think about it. What's really exciting, I've seen applications. So if you can imagine this, right? You're a busy practice. Somebody calls in and they have an emergency and I really need to talk to somebody, I really need to have somebody real quick, right? I'm in a lot of pain, right? And let's say you have 5 providers and they're all busy in chairs, right? Well, what if you could have a virtual teledentist at your fingertips and go, okay, Mr. Uretz, I'm sorry, everybody is really busy right now, but I can get you on our virtual teledentist. You push a button and all of a sudden within, I don't know, a minute, half a minute, a virtual teledentist comes on, you do a video, so at least you can get meds or whatever, you can talk to that person to alleviate their concerns. 2 things. from a patient standpoint, how cool is that you can get immediate results, right? Being able to talk to somebody immediately. But secondly, from a, it's funny because in this world, everybody wants things immediately, right? We're going to a world, a digital world, where everybody wants things right away. That's just the way it is, right? But from a practice standpoint, how great is it to say, you know what, we can get you to a doc right away. Okay, if you're a practice, so actually there's these networks of virtual dentists you're starting to see that work with DSOs, groups, and practices, almost act as their virtual team. And that's going to continue, right? Because obviously being able to have real-time information, being able to get a patient over to somebody quickly is key to keep that patient with practice, right? So these are just some of the things that you're starting to see happening. And every day I talk to teledentistry companies, and we're starting to see more and more use cases. So if you talk to me 6 months from now, I will guarantee you I'll have more things that teledentistry is going to be doing in the future.
Mm-hmm. One of the big things I know that is being done via the teledentistry platforms right now is sharing of images, whether it's images being shared with the patient for the patient to see their treatment proposal, whether it's the patient sharing images with the clinician to see what's happening inside their mouth as best they can share, or as you mentioned, the clinician to clinician referral communications where one doctor might be sharing imaging from a case to a referring doctor so that they can discuss the treatment plan for this patient. You also touched on that imaging software is advancing. How are these two things working together, and are we going to be able to make these images, more accessible, more portable, and easier for people to access, even though 3D dental cone beam scans tend to be large files that require specialized software to view?
So obviously, no, you've read my article from front to back because no, that's a great point. So the exciting thing that's happening is we've waited a long time for this, but imaging in the cloud, right? We're starting to see more and more capability to take images and to throw them up in the cloud. Now, what does that do for us, right? It makes it accessible from anywhere. And that goes to your point about not only have a collaboration, now let's say via teledentistry, let's say, for example, we have the patient in one side, we have the general dentist for that patient, or we have an oral surgeon, and let's say we have the cardiologist or the general physician right on the other end. Now the images are accessible to all these folks to be able to discuss behind the scenes. Not only that, but as we get more 3D imaging, right, it gets more sophisticated. Not every dentist has the skills and training like a radiologist to read everything about those, right? Well, now just like in the medical world, with cloud-based imaging or cloud-based storage of images, now we can actually have radiologists that need to come in and consult on a specific case. They can get that. So we're starting to see dentistry from an imaging standpoint and a deployment standpoint of images get closer to what it has been for a while. So that's just really exciting. And it was just fascinating talking to these imaging companies. I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. You brought up another thing that I was hoping to ask you about right there, which was the doctor, the cardiologist joining on a call with a dental team to discuss treatment for a patient. The science is showing, obviously, that there is a connection between oral diseases and systemic diseases in the heart, in the lungs, all over the place. There's connections that people are seeing. But the dental industry remains largely separate from the major medical industry, both on the insurance side and on the network side of providers. What did you learn about where software falls right now and how it can bridge these two gaps? And I think this is an area where you certainly have some expertise coming from the medical EHR world before you moved on to becoming an expert on dental software.
Right. Well, as you know, we've talked about this a lot. That was the sole reason I really segued into dentistry, I don't know, 10 years ago, from work with medical software, medical EHRs for so many years myself, because I thought there was a need to bring the two together, right? And so, for example, there are standards set in place. You know how I think in the 80s, right, when we first started having ATMs and they couldn't talk to each other. Right. Well, now they do. You can go to one bank and get your money from another bank. Right. The same thing is available really in what's called the interoperability world, right? So we have standards to send patient records and information back and forth, right? In the medical world, that's being done a lot more. In the dental world, not so much. So we do have the capability to do that, but if we can do that, then we can have different providers in different disciplines really putting their stamp on what's going on. It goes to what I was talking about before, what's called the medical home, or now the dental home, right? Having multiple providers. What's really exciting for me with teledentistry is that although we still have to work on sending the records themselves back and forth, right? The dental vendors need to work on that part of it. With teledentistry, we can send images in the cloud. We can do certain things in the cloud, right? So what I'm really getting excited about is when it all comes together, right? The ability to have, you know what, in fact, let's not just call it teledentistry, let's call it telehealth, right? Because telehealth as a concept has been around a long time. I look at telehealth as virtual care, and then I look at medicine and teledentistry as doing part of that. So we look at the telehealth world moving forward. Can you imagine we'll be able to have some virtual visits and then through standards have the patient's records actually sent back and forth to support those visits? So that's what I'm really excited about, is the merging of the two, the ability to have records sent back and forth and the ability to have collaboration in the cloud. Then we have a really great world for patient care.
Now, where are we at on the dental side? I know that there are some dental software companies that tout the term EHR with their software, and there are, you know, plenty of software companies that want to talk about being connected to other systems. But do we have interoperability on the way in the dental space? And is that interoperability going to be interoperable with the medical interoperability standards?
Well, you know, it's really interesting you bring that up, because some of the dental software vendors, some of the more innovative ones that I've spoke to over the years, actually have the ability for their records to adhere to these standards that I've been talking about. But the problem is getting vendors to play in the same sandbox, right? Just because you're able to send a record or receive a record in this national standardized format doesn't mean that you do it, right? And that's been a problem in medical for years and also in dental. So to answer your question is, I'm starting to see more innovative dental vendors, not enough, by the way, and I'm pushing them. That's one of the reasons I got into dentistry. I'm trying to push vendors to do the right thing with EHR and do this stuff we're talking about, right? So you're seeing more and more of that, and you will continue to see more and more of that, but we still have to have the vendors to do a little bit of kumbaya and say, you know what? I recognize somebody else might have did that different dental software. So I want to work with those companies and make it work. It's better for the industry. And I hope to continue to work with dental software vendors to answer your question, which is, how can we be interoperable with each other?
Where, you know, I guess, what do you see as the biggest hurdles right now that the dental software industry is facing as it is looking to create more interoperability and more connectivity between different platforms?
Well, it's interesting. I saw this in the medical world. You know, people aren't going to do anything until they're pushed into it, right? Typically, I mean, you know, if I'm a dental software vendor and I'm making money and have a lot of clients and I have, you know, limited resources, what's going to make me want to invest time and energy into this new stuff, right? So here's the soapbox, right, for all your listeners out there. Just like in medicine, it has to come from the industry itself, right? People have to be talking to their vendors all the time about, hey, you know what? I really need this thing. I need this function. I need interoperability because I need to work easily with the oral surgeons or the cardiologists or whatever, right? Because I'll tell you, I mean, it's just business, right? And if the vendor doesn't really have a reason to do it. But what I found was with EHRs, this is really interesting, and I hope the same thing happens in dentistry with EHRs. When we started with EHRs years ago in medicine, there'd be one or two or three vendors that would do it, right? And then we started publicizing that and started talking about how it's helpful. And all of a sudden now, you'd get practices and groups asking about it. Now then the floodgates opened, right? Once people started asking about it and saying, hey, you know what, I'm looking at software and I need this and this and this. Then all of a sudden, if it became a requirement to purchase new software, update the software, then the vendors were like, okay, yeah, maybe, we'll invest with. Now, I have to say, okay, on the flip side, because every day, as you know, I talk to vendors all the time for podcasts and articles, and I won't name them in this, but there are also innovative vendors that just in their own right really see where the future's going and really are ahead of the curve. So I am seeing some dental software vendors doing the right thing, doing things. But I think for a whole sea change in the industry, to your point, I think it really has to come from us, right? As the industry saying, you know what, we need this. Can you please do it? And then once you start doing that, then I think everybody will come along.
Hmm. Well, are there any kind of areas of the article or just kind of trends in dental software right now that we haven't touched on just yet?
One of the things I think that's really exciting is the idea of, let's call it rules-based processing, right? So in other words, you're in a template for an EHR and you're doing some kind of procedure. And let's say it might or might not need an anesthetic, right? Well, let's say it does need an anesthetic, then the system presents the different kinds of anesthetics, right? If you don't need an anesthetic, it doesn't, right? So that's rules-based processing. That's just a simple example. We have examples of rules-based workflows and work lists that are happening. So for example, let's say you send a bunch of alerts out to your patients based on a certain condition, the patients answer, and then based on those answers, you develop work lists and workflows of what needs to be done with that patient, and then you monitor that. Intelligence and workflows, for example, in billing, let's say there's certain codes you have that require other codes. Well, if you put those codes in, then the system intelligently, based on the rules and logic, says, you know what? You might want to use this code. I'm not sure, but let's check, the demographics of the patient, for example, or the condition of the patient. Does it warrant a different code or whatever, right? So basically, one thing that's really exciting to me is the idea, and go back to your thoughts about medical, right? A lot of this stuff isn't new. I mean, I've been pounding the beat talking about this stuff for years, but mainly because I saw it in medicine, right? The idea of rules-based processing, rules-based workflows have been around in medicine. So these are the types of things, intelligent types of work lists, right? Where you have, think about it, your DSO group, you have 300 employees, there's stuff going on all the time you have to do. Well, things get lost in the shuffle, right? So now you have the ability to actually monitor and follow up on a lot of that stuff, right? So more intelligence and more rules-based processing is being put in, which also helps for decision support, right? So you were talking about EHRs a little while ago. Wouldn't it be great if you're a dentist in the chair, you see a complicated case, and the system says, well, based on all the data, my million records of data, here's what you should think about. Here's what the evidence shows. Here's what you should be looking at. And so the thing is about this, Noah, is that medicine has a lot of databases behind it, but we don't have the amount of information yet in dentistry. So to make all this stuff click, right, and make all this stuff work, we need to gather, right, all this information. We're seeing it more and more. We're seeing more and more visits being recorded and details with those visits being accessible. So once that starts happening, then just like with the medical world, we're going to start seeing more intelligence, more decision support being helpful to dentists and clinicians in dentistry.
Well, wonderful. The article is A Digital Transformation by Mike Uretz. It's in the September issue of Dental Products Report and also online at dentalproductsreport.com. Mike, thanks so much for writing this article for us and for joining us here today.
Well, thanks for asking me to write it, Noah. It's been really enjoyable for me as well. Thanks a lot.